Hi guys, welcome to Unit 8 and Chapter number 7 in your textbooks, which is, Chapter 8. I am dumb. Chapter 8, Unit 8, the 6th and ninth Commandments. When we look at this chapter, we're really going to find that we're doing a lot of review. We're going to kind of do a little bit of exploration, but this is really in many ways covering what we've already discussed in terms of the sacrament of marriage. We're going to go a little bit more in depth into what it is to be a human being and what it means to be made in God's image and likeness, and how we're called to be human beings, but more specifically, sexual beings and what that means. So in this chapter today, we're going to get started with marriage and creation. And again, this should be review for us, but we'll kind of bring up some stuff that maybe we didn't get a chance to talk about when we were talking about the sacrament of marriage. There are 3 questions that you are going to be responsible for in terms of your Unit 8 questions, and they are: first, why did God create each human person as either male or female? Second, what did Christ do for marriage? And then third, what is chastity? Now, we've already addressed all 3 of those questions, so we shouldn't necessarily need to readdress them, but I will, just to make sure we're on the same page. So, one of the things that we're going to kind of come over again and again, and one of the things that your text teaches you is that the 6th and ninth commandments teach us human sexuality can only find their true meaning and full expression within the inner sanctum of marriage, right? That is to say, sexual expression is only morally just, morally correct, when it is found and expressed within the context of marriage, i.e., when sex is immoral, is outside of marriage, okay, or outside the marital covenant. So that being said, and one of the journal questions that I'm asking you in Journal Collection 11, or a variation of it, how would you reply to someone who said, I don't mind if my sexual activity isn't as meaningful or fully expressed as the church says it should be? I'll settle for it the way it is. Well, hopefully as we move forward, you're going to be armed with some good answers to that question. First and foremost, God always desires that which is best for us. So if God has said these are the situations, this is the context in which you should be having sex, maybe he has a reason for it. That reason being, it is what's best for us. And I think kind of part and parcel with that, settling for less, right? Particularly in this case, is not just an option, it is seriously sinful. But more importantly, or more kind of another way of approaching the idea of settling for less, it has bad effects, right? It has a bad effect on ourself, on our partner, on our children, if any, and on society. And so we really need to be mindful of that reality, that truth, that God wants what's best for us, and he gives us these commandments not as necessarily rules that we have to abide by, but rules that we want to abide by because they are things that allow us to live our best lives. Okay. So again, a little bit of review. What is the marital covenant? Okay. And it is that agreement, right? The vows sworn by the man and the woman, where they make a lifelong commitment to each other before God. And your textbook and the Catechism itself uses the expression by its nature ordered, right, in relation to the marriage covenant. And I guess the question is, what does that mean? It means this: if it's by its nature ordered, it means that God created the very structure of marriage. And in the case of marriage, God made the good of the spouses and the procreation of and education of children essential purposes of marriage, right? Again, if we look at the purposes of marriage, the purposes of the sexual act or conjugal act within marriage, we see that, right? In terms of Let's talk about the sexual part of it because that's what this chapter is about. The unitive, two becoming one, them growing closer in bond, closer to each other, and the procreative aspect, that bond creating love, right? That primary love between the partners that generates life that is in turn loved through the love generated by the love of the partners, of the spouses. So, the relationship between natural and sacramental marriage, right? Natural marriage is what we see in the book of Genesis. Adam and Eve made for each other. It's what most marriages in this world are supposed to be if they are ones that take place outside of the church. They are, by their very nature, natural marriages, although some can be sacramental, and the ones within the church are always sacramental. Some will make the argument that some that take place outside of the marriage are also sacramental. I'm not going to make that argument. I don't want to confuse you with that. But there are some people who will make that argument. I'm not one of them. But going back to this idea, what is the relationship between natural and sacramental marriage? Christ took marriage, which is a natural human institution, and infused it with supernatural life and grace. Okay? So within the context of sacramental marriage that we find within the church, we're going to find grace in that sacrament, but also in the way that we renew, right? And of course, as we've learned through the sacrament of marriage, we know that one of the ways that we renew that sacrament is through the sex act between spouses. And so they regain the graces of the marital sacrament through the expression of the marital act, the conjugal act. Human sexuality. Right? Human sexuality is different than the sexuality of animals. There, I just made a very bold statement, right? How? How is it different, right? And the reality is, in animals, sexuality is a matter of instinct, whereas the human person can control his or her sexuality and direct it to higher ends, right? Or, in fact, abstain from it. It is a choice, right? It is an expression of our free will in many ways. We can choose to participate or not to participate. We can choose to not act according to our nature, right? And so it is something that does indeed separate us from animals and kind of shows one of those differences between us and animals. What should be the proper nature of the marital act? And the answer is a personal and loving meeting between husband and wife is proper, which reaffirms a total dedication to each other. It is a gift of self to your spouse, right? That's that proper meeting, that loving meeting, personal meeting between husband and wife. It's the complete and total gift of love to your spouse. And when we look about moral questions relating to marriage and sexuality, there is a fundamental truth that governs them, and it is simply this. Every sexual act or expression has to fully respect both the unitive and the procreative aspects of human sexuality. Period, the end, right? If it doesn't respect either, it is not moral. And it's a very simple way to look at it, right? Does the act fully respect both the unitive and the procreative ends or aspects of human sexuality? And if the answer is no to either, right, let alone both, it is not a moral act. So we already know what the conjugal and marital act are. They're sexual intercourse, right? And they're called the conjugal or marital act simply because marriage is the only proper setting for the act to occur, and it's the only context in which sexual expression, sexual intercourse is in fact possible to be moral. So the focus of this chapter, right, is pretty straightforward. Christ restored the meaning of marital love to God's original intention, full stop. This elevation of love will be developed in a bunch of different ways, and we're going to kind of see it in three ways as we move forward. First, the sacredness of marital love, right? The reality that the sexual act is holy, right? Sacred. Second, the sins against marital love. Okay, what are some of the things that we do that violate the sacredness or holiness of marriage? And third, Christian formation in marital love. That is, what are we called to learn as far as how to better express ourselves through marital love. So, marriage, we're going to just, again, do a quick review of marriage. And we're not going to go too far into it because, well, we'll talk more about it tomorrow. Is everyone called to be married? And we know the answer to that is unequivocally no, right? And there are a couple of important reasons for voluntarily and freely renouncing marriage. Oh, you want me to give you the answers? Sorry. The priesthood, right? Religious life, apostolate of the faithful. Maybe you just haven't found the right person, right? These are all valid reasons for not being married, and they're fine. People are called to the single life, right? People are called to the priesthood. People are called to religious life, and that's fine, right? That's reality. And those three vocations, as we've already discussed, express their chastity in a different way, right? They are living celibate lives, hopefully, right? Celibate means unmarried, and the expression of unmarried people who are living morally is no sex. For people who are not celibate, i.e., people who are married, they too abstain from sex often, right? But they are morally allowed to have sex because that is where sex belongs in God's plan, right? Within the context of marriage, as long as they're open to the unitive and the procreative aspects. Through the marital act, husband and wife, man and woman, become co-creators with God, right? God has designed the marital act so that man and woman and God are all necessary in order to bring a new human being into the world, right? And again, let me just restate this in a way that hopefully makes sense. Celibacy is not something practiced by married people because celibacy means not married. But whether you are priest, religious, single, or married, all those vocations, all those different states of life practice chastity, right? Practice the moral virtue of chastity, which is related to temperance. And chastity, the virtue of chastity, is something that is expressed differently, right? So chastity means not having sex if you are a priest, religious, or single. And for the married person, it means you're going to be having sex only with your spouse, okay? And the reason chastity is so important is because it helps direct us toward another virtue, purity, right? Purity of heart. And that virtue helps us to see God and the dignity of every human person because we're able to see God in the people that we encounter. So one of the things that we're going to need to discuss as we move forward, and certainly welcome questions tomorrow on this, is the nature of being a sexual being as a human being. And for most people, again, when we say sexual being, they immediately go, that means we're able to have sex. And yes, it does mean that, but sex is a small part of what being a sexual being means. First and foremost, sex comes from the Latin word secarre, which means to separate or to make separate. And it speaks to the reality that as human beings, we are made male and female. And we have beautiful differences, right? We are different, but we are equal in dignity. Now, unfortunately, what we've seen in terms of some people's understanding over history is that idea an extreme kind of idea one way or the other. We've had kind of one end, which is the idea that sexes are not equal to each other and that one sex is better than the other, which is wrong, right? On the other end, we've had the idea that, well, they're equal, so there's no differences, which is equally wrong. There are differences, right? I'm not going to say that those differences are always kind of stark and wide or anything like that, but there are distinctly differences between men and women. And when we say that there is a complementary component, right, that men and women are complementary beings, it means that by God's design, man and women, in both their differences and their similarities, help to complete and perfect each other physically, emotionally, and spiritually. I need only look at my wife to realize the reality of that. We have strengths and we have weaknesses, but both of our weaknesses, my weaknesses and her weaknesses, usually are overcome by the strengths that the other person possesses because of the complementary nature we have. Very specifically, I can say I'm a very rational being. I am pretty strong, I have to say, in terms of emotional components, emotional aspects as well. However, I know she's much stronger in that area, just like I know that I'm also stronger than her in the rational area. It's not a slight, it's a recognition of the reality that we live. But together, the two of us are able to lean on each other and come together and are stronger for it. Stronger for the recognition of the differences, stronger for the acceptance of those differences, stronger for the learning to learn from the other, to turn to the other in those times where we need assistance. And so understanding that there is a complementary difference, and understanding that marriage itself is complementary, and it's an inherent requirement of marriage, that complementary thing. Understand this complementary inherent requirement in marriage is going to rule out marriage between persons of the same gender because the complementary component doesn't exist, right? It cannot exist between two persons of the same gender. And we'll talk more about that tomorrow when we talk about marriage and sexuality. Certainly welcome any questions about it in class, the Zoom class today, I guess, I don't know, tomorrow. But for now, let me just kind of finish with answering those three questions that I asked you guys at the beginning. First, why did God create each human person as either male or female? He created man, male, and female. And when I say man here, I mean humanity. So God made humans, male and female, and created lifelong, exclusive, and loving marriage as the way to bring new human beings into the world, right? To allow humans to be co-creators with him of new life. Second, what did Christ do for marriage? He restored marriage to its original intent, its original meaning, ruling out divorce, which Moses had permitted, not wanted to permit, but permitted because of the hardness of the hearts, so to speak, that we see in throughout Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, all that good stuff of the Pentateuch. And then third, what is chastity? It's a virtue of living human sexuality according to God's plan, according to your state in life, and it is part of the cardinal virtue of temperance. Okay? That's all I got for you today. I will continue with this tomorrow. Love you guys. I miss you guys, and I'll see you in class.